So hopefully you can all hear me. I'm Paul, and welcome to this AI engineering event on the future of health. And well, first of all, I'd just like to thank a few people. So first of all, it's IDEALondon is a fantastic place here. We've been hosting our AI engineering events for at least 6 months now, almost a year, I think. They are a collaboration between UCL Engineering and Pontikos Lab, which means they've got kind of resources to help, and I think they would love it if some of you explored some of the facilities they have that go much beyond what you see here today. So we've got the networking later and the event space, but actually there's quite a lot of other space in here for people who are wanting to create deep tech startups and the like. Secondly, you've noticed there are some funny little blue birds here, and I'd like to thank Vulture, who are a very generous sponsor of ours and have been helping us to run all sorts of different things. And yes, are the provider of the little blue vultures here. We also, I'd like to mention Pinecone, who's also a sponsor of ours, and we've got some very generous sponsors. When I say we, I represent an organisation called KXSB, which stands for King's Cross Sandbox, and it's a not-for-profit that is involved in pre-competitive collaboration of open source AI projects. That's a bit of a mouthful, so just to kind of get that in context, what we're able to do is you can join that platform completely free of charge if you're a member, and become a member, and join the Discord channel there. And what we do is we launch initiatives off that. And in fact, we just had an amazingly successful London, Paris, Berlin multimodal creative AI accelerator, which is a big mouthful of an event, and also quite a complex event to run, but it was very, very successful. We launched in London, it went to Station F in Paris, and it then went on to an after party in Berlin. We created multiple teams, and those teams got prizes and things like that. The reason I mention that is I'm sexing you up on the next one. So the next event we're probably going to have here is going to be around AI and cybersecurity. And we're probably going to launch a mini accelerator off the back of that event. So that means join KXSB.org. Join the Discord channel on there. So anybody who's vaguely interested in open source AI, whether you want to build something or whether you just want to be involved in the community and all the rest of it, it's a fantastic platform for doing that. And as I say, it's free to join as individuals, and often these contests have prizes. So we were giving quite sort of hefty prizes for the last initiative, and we were also giving out GPUs to winners. So I think that's all I need to say on sponsors, including ourselves. I also probably should mention there is a camera there. So anybody who doesn't want to be involved in the footage that comes out of that, I think probably it's only the first 3 rows that are in danger. Don't look around if you don't want to be seen. Or just mention to Phil there later on that if you want to be sort of cut out of any footage at all, you'll see it all on social media. So anyway, I think I've said everything that I need to say for now. We've got a great panel here this evening, and what I'd like to do first of all is I'd like to ask each of you to spend a couple of minutes just introducing yourselves and what you're working on at the moment and kind of what excites you. So I'll start at the other end.
Hi, good evening everyone. I'm Deepti Atrish. I'm CEO and co-founder of Medicine AI. And Medicine AI is all about empowering older adults live independently at their home, and also making sure that the people with chronic conditions can safely take care of their conditions and manage it well. And we're making an excellent use of LLMs, and our conversational agents are doing an amazing job. So I think it is exciting, and I also feel that AI has best use case in healthcare, and we're going to talk more about it, how and what we are doing. But I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Isabel, and yeah, as you can see from the title, I'm an investor at HCBC. early stage deep tech fund. We invest mostly in like very, very early pre-seed, seed, Series A companies across Europe and the US. We are French fund, so Paris headquartered, but we have a small London office where I'm based, and 2 more people in the Bay Area. And yeah, deep tech for us is kind of like, anything scientific breakthrough related. So many very highly technical scientific teams, spin-off companies, and I would say very capital intensive companies, differentiating IP. But so we've done in the past everything from computing, climate tech, energy, robotics, manufacturing, space tech, but also life science and healthcare is one of our large kind of like, pillars. And overall, we are really, really interested in obviously like healthcare topics, especially computation and AI related topics. And maybe just briefly, 1 sentence about myself. So I joined HCBC about like 2 years ago. Before that, I was a pure academic. Did my PhD at the Francis Crick Institute here in London, also postdoc, and I was working mostly on stem cell biology, so looking at multiomics and high throughput gene editing screens. So I have a more molecular biology background, I would say. Before that, I was working on aggressive brain tumors, originally, as you can maybe tell from my accent, from Germany. So studied molecular medicine there. But yeah, so I really appreciate this type of events. I founded the Crick Science Entrepreneur Network. It has similar type of events like networking, events like this, also hackathon during the summer, and also Nucleate, which is a life science accelerator, which I founded here in London. But yeah, that's just a little bit of context.
My name's Dean Barrett. I'm a professor in the UCL Walks Institute, and my background is in biomedical engineering and computer science. And I've probably spent most of my career so far developing software algorithms for analysing images, both for diagnosis, but mainly for guiding surgical procedures of one type or another across various applications. So I'm still involved in research quite heavily at UCL, although I've been working more recently on the regulatory and innovation side of things. So I've been involved as a founder or co-founder of 2 spin-out companies, and most recently I've been getting quite involved in the regulatory side of AI, which is interesting, of course. But on the research side of things, a lot of our work in my group is on prostate cancer and using MR imaging and other types of image to detect and look at the progression of prostate cancer. And one thing on that side of things that we've been quite interested in for a few years is image quality, how different AI algorithms respond to real medical images, which of course are very variable quality. How do they work in practice? So I've kind of found myself moving more towards, as the years go on, the more sort of practical applied side of it rather than the theoretical and the ins and outs of software development. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Nikolas Pontikos. I'm Associate Professor at UCL and the co-founder of Eye2Gene. My background is in computer science and bioinformatics, and I've been in ophthalmology now in eye care for like nearly 10 years. I work just around the corner at the Morpeth Eye Hospital in UCL Institute of Ophthalmology. My team and I analyze large data sets of retinal scans to try and identify different types of diseases, and we help mostly with applying AI for diagnosis and precision medicine. What excites me the most about AI, I think, well, a lot, I guess, in healthcare. I think we're seeing a lot of maybe very easy but laborious tasks, which hopefully are getting automated, and now we're moving to, spending our time on more interesting problems. I think, that's going to be quite exciting. How do we use AI in practice, and how it changes healthcare in general.
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, it's fascinating to see how many kind of fairly close connections I think there are, probably both in the panel and maybe in the room as well. Of course, the Crick Institute is jointly run with UCL, so I don't know how much you guys are involved in that, and also Deputy, do you get involved in the Crick? It's not a panel question, just out of interest. And also, I'm just wondering, how many people, show of hands, how many people in the audience are involved, have touched on the health domain, apart from personally? Wow. Oh, that's quite a lot. Okay, so I'm sure we're going to hear some interesting stuff. I was involved in the Crick accelerator, but that goes back a long way now. I haven't really touched on that for about 5 years. But probably just to give it a tiny bit of context, we used to often think in terms of the different segments within the health domain, and these were like drug discovery, radio imaging, which I think you're involved in, and various other segments. I guess my question really is kind of which areas of health do you think have the most potential, or which excite you yourself most? And maybe explain a little bit about why you think AI is having an impact on those particular areas.
So first, yeah, okay. I think Dean and myself were both interested in computer vision as a means of analyzing images and automating a lot of the So one task in medical imaging, which is quite common, is identifying, for example, different types of lesions and annotating them. And that's a quite, I would say, laborious task, and especially now that the throughput and the volume of imaging is increasing. So it used to be maybe that, very few patients would have imaging, and the imaging wouldn't be very high 3D volumes, high density like they are now. So for example, I can say for ophthalmology, that if you've got a 3D volume with 512 or more bead scans, you're not going to want to have somebody annotating every single bead scan individually, identifying lesions in there. That's just not practical, right? So people have just been actually looking at only the central one that goes through the middle of the fovea, basically, that's the most important one, but you're throwing away all that other data. So AI is really going to allow us to make the most of this high throughput data that we have been analyzing, at least I can say that computer vision. And then for genetics data and bioinformatics data, we're still seeing these experiments are generating huge amounts of data. And again, we're only maybe analyzing a small fraction of it, because a lot of it we don't really know how to interpret. So we're hoping we're going to be able to make more out of that data as well, of the genetics data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. D.
Yeah, thanks. I think a direct answer would be that pretty much all areas of healthcare will be impacted by AI as they are now. But one of the things, just in preparation for this, I just checked the statistics. If you look at the FDA, that's the regulator for medical devices in the US, and they have a database of AI, what they call AI-enabled devices, which are mainly software devices. And there's about 1,000 devices listed, about 1,000 products listed on that database. And about 75% of those are radiological devices and software for analysing images. So, the others are a real mixed bunch. Some of them are software for guiding robotic surgery, for example, or for counting cells for in vitro testing, that sort of thing. But it's largely dominated by radiological applications at the moment. So I think there's some reasons for that. One of the reasons is I think people have been working for quite a long time in that kind of area, so the technical problems are fairly well specified, you might say. And AI is a new solution which is solving many of those harder problems in that kind of field. And another thing is just shortage of medical specialists and radiologists in that case, but it's also, I think, there's a big driver is where there is a real clinical need, either because healthcare professionals just aren't as abundant as we'd like, or there's something about the particular field. So going forward, I think it's always difficult to predict, but I would say that we'll probably continue seeing a dominance of radiology and imaging, but I'd like to think that lots of other areas of healthcare will start to be impacted, and a lot of that may well be actually sort of behind the scenes or under the bonnet, where you're not even clear that there is AI going on here, because that's what's happening in the rest of society. So
That's really useful. And I think, Isabel, as an investor, you can be very objective about this. It's a complex area, isn't it? What sort of areas are really kind of starting to move, I suppose, in the health sector with AI?
Yeah, I think in general, I think how we look at it is there's obviously AI and in general kind of like healthcare, like hospitals really like, AI is there to automate things, to make things cheaper, faster in general, but that can be really from like, as you said, like patient monitoring, it can be in terms of like note taking, right? And this is something which is, I think, a clearer, I would say, like path right now. But then at the same time, there's the big picture of like personalized medicine still, which was promised many, many years ago and still is not here. But I think there's still a lot of innovators working on it, right? With different technologies which are dependent as well. Like sequencing getting cheaper. But I'm just asking here, like, how many people here have their genome sequenced? Yeah, exactly. So I think we're still very far away, but we need innovation there from the sequencing perspective, but also infrastructure. How can we make it accessible? And I think that's where AI also is like really, really important. There are a lot of patient groups, a lot of countries here, demographics which don't really have access to good healthcare, and AI could be the solution. Telemedicine and so on, like making diagnostics much more streamlined, using, for example, voice-based, for example, diagnostics. But then something that where my, at least like expertise is maybe a little bit broader is, drug discovery is the kind of like classic drug discovery and development, where there's still huge timelines. We still have these all like AI drug discovery companies who popped up in the last couple of years, but there's still no, let's say, true winner or like good data in proving that AI in drug discovery or development is much better. So this is also something that we are still, we think there's huge potential, but we're still early, and this is just the overall problem which we're probably gonna talk about. Healthcare and biotech is just slow. It's very slow.
Debbie?
Yeah, I agree with all the panelists, but I also have another take from another angle. You'll see that across the world, most of the countries spend between 75 to 85% of their spend of healthcare into managing the health of elderly. And in that also we see that is because they're not managing their health better. They're coming back to the emergencies visits, or the hospitals are raising the time as well. Now I think there's a very high impact, and the amount of number of hospital visits and admissions can be massively reduced if we can focus our energies, which quite a lot of companies are doing, but the focus is to empower them with the data, with the sensors, with the conversational AI agents, which are specialized. They know what they're like, about the disease. And I think that's one of the very important parts. The other part is, like Isabel said, empowering clinicians. They want to do their job, but they have so much paperwork because of compliances that they end up spending so much time into paperwork. And I think the other impact I feel is also on making sure that clinicians are empowered into doing what they're good at. And that is also possible when we are fully loaded with AI in hospitals and clinics, and we're not waiting for 8 hours in an emergency room, and that is kind of standard here in UK and America as well. So we're living in 2025. It should not be the case.
Thanks very much. I'll segment this next question up a little bit between, say, researchers and founders. But what are the main challenges facing research in this area?
Yes, there's a lot of challenges still, unfortunately, but that's always the case, I guess. One of the things that is still quite a big issue, and it's more of an issue because a lot of the deep learning techniques that are used at the moment require good quality labeled data to train them. And particularly in imaging, and probably most healthcare applications, I'd say, except for, I don't know, it's a few, but a relatively small number, it's quite difficult to get the quantity of data. And certainly in imaging, I'm always looking across at the computer vision world and seeing, the amazing kind of performance of some of the algorithms that are developed there for detecting things in natural images, and we forget that they're often trained on millions or maybe hundreds of millions sometimes of images, and actually getting that sort of quantity of data in imaging and as I say, in some other applications is very, very difficult. So we've got a data paucity kind of issue. Another thing connected with that is actually curating that data in some way and specifically labeling that data in a way that it can be used to train a reliable model. And those of us who've worked, I'm sure many of you who've worked with images or medical data appreciate that it's quite messy in practice. If you go to a hospital and you start looking at MR scans, you find they're not like the ones you see in the textbooks. They are. They've got all sorts of features in them and artifacts and that kind of thing. So that's another problem is just handling that kind of variability in the data. So that's probably still a main problem, I'd say. There are some other problems as well to do in the research world, just about how we validate models, AI models of various types. There's some frameworks that are starting to be introduced for that, and also methods for explainability. That's another thing we'll probably touch on that later. How do you actually work out what a model is doing, and particularly if it fails, can you try to get enough understanding to avoid that failure in the future? So I think there's still quite a lot of work in those kind of areas.
Isabel, just casting your mind back to the crick. I remember a few years ago, AI hadn't really sort of permeated the research community in the crick in general, had it? And do you think that's changing? Is it getting considerably better, or how would you kind of assess the what it's like in a research establishment like that with regard to AI?
Yeah, I would say so. I when I did my undergrad and masters, there was no AI. Like bioinformatics or computational biology courses were literally just like going to databases and like trying to align some sequences from the genome and looking for gene names. I think the crick still many groups now have PhD students, postdocs who are integrating machine learning to analyze their data. But I wouldn't say that we're there yet in terms of like really using its potential, its highest potential yet. What I'm seeing, although, is the crick has a lot of facilities, for example, sequencing facility, high throughput screening facilities that I've used, where it's about automation, right? You're using robotic arms, different systems to screen and experiment much more in a short amount of time. And this is where I think AI is definitely already, integrated, just like basically being able to see, okay, we have that kind of like data flywheel. You generated data, and it's still a little bit like in the future, but being that AI scientist, is the really big vision. So you can generate data, analyze it at the same time, and then again the robot can basically just run the experiments. But yeah, I think the crick is maybe a couple of years behind, but I think overall, yeah, I don't know any institute right now who's there yet.
Thanks very much. Depti, I almost expect to hear kind of a completely different set of challenges that might face a founder. Is it still the old, let's say the old chestnuts of how to access the NHS or regulation? Anyway, I don't want to ask too many leading questions, so I'll leave it to you.
Well, you're right. It's still the same. It is still the funding is not squeezing every single day, and the compliances are still difficult. The primary healthcare sector that we see EMIS and System 1, they're still so complicated to integrate. So yeah, the challenges are still there. The only change, I do see that there is a proactive work in solving those challenges as well, and making certain international codes available so that there is the terminology or the systems can speak to each other. It's getting better, but yeah, it is still quite challenging to seamlessly send data from one side to other, but it is definitely a lot better from earlier. That is in terms of interoperability, but also getting the FDA approval or CE medical mark for the devices or for the sensors is also quite challenging. It doesn't come straightforward. And I also think there's another challenge with AI, which I see will be overcome in coming years, is the friction from the clinicians and the patients. So how open are they? Are they ready to trust? And our clinicians, because they feel like, I need to see the patient. I need to really talk, which is quite right actually. But at the same time, you can't. We are talking about scaling up. And so I think that's a challenge. But as we are now used to using Relax or calling on WhatsApp and doing video calls, I think times are changing. And we will see that it will be a normal thing for a person to get up in the morning, see my sensors are there, and my AI agent per se says that, hello, I think you've got fever, do you want to check yourself again? Or, you have a scale, you're standing on the scale and it's automatically checking something is not right. And, all those biomarkers will be picked up. We're not too far. Everything is happening at quite a high pace. And I'm very proud that at Medicine KI, we're on the top of integrating the best of the sensors and the technology and cloud computing to make sure that we understand the challenges and work with the system, not against it. And I think, that's what I feel.
Thanks very much. Just to warn the audience, we are going to have a good 20 minutes of Q&A, so get your questions ready. Probably a bit unfair to just throw this, just still on the subject of kind of research and stuff like this, so I'm going to fairly throw a bit of a curveball at you, Nikolas. I was just thinking that we all represent an ecosystem, I think, and I think there's quite a strong ecosystem around King's Cross. I mean, I had this kind of dream 10 years ago of King's Cross being a world-class AI health ecosystem, and it looked on the surface like it was going to be, because it's got the Crick Institute next to the Turing, next to DeepMind, and so on, so on. I got fairly good at selling that ecosystem, by the way. My feeling is that there's still a lack of collaboration between the main institutes and things like that, and I just wondered, Nikolas, whether you come across that at all.
Yes, so we are going to be moving from Wall Street to King's Cross as well.
Okay.
So the hospital is going to be moving, the date is 2027, so this is a new building that's being built close to base KX at the UCL.
Street.
Exactly, yeah. So, in terms of, everyone who's been at UCL for a long time knows just how big the university is and how difficult it is to know what's going on, like in a different institute. But so lots of people working on the same or similar problems that should be talking to each other that just don't even know they exist until they meet at these events like this today. So I think building bridges and especially in the world of AI and where people are going to be more just like for not communicating less, it's going to be challenging. And we do need more of these sort of events like this and these sort of, networks and getting people to introduce people to each other that think they're relevant for certain, helping each other out. Like, for example, us founders talking to investors and stuff like that, for example. Yeah, I think there's a lot of work there to be done. I don't know if AI can help with that. I'm not sure. I think it's interesting that even though we're all working on AI, at the end of the day, it's still, if you want investment for your fund, for your company, you're not going to have an AI that's going to say, okay, recommend you talk to this investor. You have to go out and network and find and talk to people. So yeah, I think that we need to bear that in mind, and maybe we'll have more time to do that if AI is doing all the boring jobs. Yeah.
Actually, that's a good segue though into the next question. I think I'm going to ask just specifically to Isabel. If I go back like 5 years, I think funding for AI in health actually was pretty buoyant. Maybe it's not 5 years, maybe it's 6 or 7, but it was the money was flowing. I get the feeling at the moment that probably it's relatively tough in the UK funding an AI health startup.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And what we're seeing is a little bit that shift that you get these like massive rounds, right? Still, in the past 2 years, you got these like, every other month there was like a company coming out of stealth, like just launching with like 100 or 200 million suddenly. And then you have all the others which are struggling of like just raising a small amount of like, 2 to 5 million. And I think because the hype is real or was real, I think a lot of people got excited about the potential, and if the hype or the expectations are so high and so much money was put in 5-6 years ago, but nothing really happens in these 5-6 years, obviously investors are shying away, and also our investors are basically like more, I think, like careful, being like, are you sure you want to, look at this, or we're not really interested in like covering this space. Yeah, I hope like, it will probably change, because usually in investment, you have these like hype cycles, and I feel like AI in health, it will come back. ChatGPT, for example, OpenAI was one of those like moments where suddenly now with all the like AI agents and so on, again, there's more interest, or actually something worked and it might be applicable for healthcare. And I think there will be more of these like wow and new moments. Yeah.
Actually, Isabel, that really kind of was my next question. I'm jumping a couple of questions here, but during the last 5 or 6 years, there has been that massive technology shift with LLMs suddenly breaking into the market. And I guess I could ask all of you very briefly, maybe just to say where you're seeing LLMs. Deputy, are you using that kind of technology in your solution?
Absolutely, yeah, we are. And I'm very proud to say that this is such an important backbone for us as well. And it's exciting. So yeah, picture this, a few years ago, now actually, because we're new, but a few years later, I would say, people will be, able to seamlessly manage their health, without doing much. Their watch, for example, will tell a lot of biomarkers now. The phone, for example, we have one of the technology that we are going live with, wherein you're just looking at like 30 seconds and it's going to tell you medical grade reading of how stressed you are, or your medical vitals as well, in terms of heart rate and blood pressure. So that just tells you that, okay, time to stop, reflect, and do something about what's causing you, a pain or anxiety. So I think there's a lot that's happening, and the way we are making use of AI within our platform or in our startup is also amazing. The kind of feedback we're getting from the clinicians after looking at our conversation, the patient conversation with AI. They just feel that it's so accurate. It's like so much better. And on the other side, for a patient who's just been diagnosed with something like, let's say, diabetic condition, and they don't know actually much about it. They have a very busy life, but Google is not the answer. So what we have done is our RAG architecture makes sure the information that we have loaded is completely medical grade. It's coming from the clinicians, and they're happy to put it forward. And we have it on various diseases. So now patient is comfortable that so we do 5 checks on our regular health checks on our patients. One is just to get the consent from them that are happy. Then the second, actually, if they miss a vital or there is a hike in the blood pressure or something is not right in any other vital, AI is going to call them. That's the trigger. And then they're going to AI is going to ask, can you actually do one more time your blood pressure reading? I want to be sure, is it actually, just one time you had this problem, or that I need to know? That's one of the, biomarkers. And then we have another question like, what did you eat last night? If we still see the problem is there, then checking up on their eating habits and also their exercise or regular life, and also mental health. Are you connected with your family? Would you like me to connect with one of your carers? So we have our carer app where every family member have their set of carers. So all of that just produces a small report. And that report is week on week, month on month. It's creating a trend or a pattern of a patient. And now whenever they see the doctor, or obviously if there's anything urgent, a clinician is called, a nurse is called, something is done. I mean, there's going to be lesser emergencies. And I think the way we're making use of AI is incredible. I think it's amazing how I just feel proud of how things are going to be different because of the technology. And unfortunately, a few years ago, I lost my father, and he was in he was in late 60s. I just feel only if I knew certain things, we could have done something about it. I felt so helpless, and that's how my journey began into this digital health. I'm a technology entrepreneur by my background. So I think the impact we're going to create using the technology is massive. And that's why I'm doing.
Thanks, Debbie. That's a clear case. What I was going to ask Nikolas and Dean, though, is computer vision actually was pretty well established before LLMs, right? And was pretty efficient. Are you finding that it's providing an extra layer on top that's useful, or are you more in the camp that, it hallucinates too much, so let's just stick with the I was going to say traditional AI, which is probably only also 10 years old. But.
Yeah, I'll start. It's difficult to say, really. It depends on the application, I think. And they definitely do have a role, LLMs, but the hallucination, particularly for some very specific medical applications like diagnosis, is problematic. So that's one of the concerns is how do you validate them comprehensively? So I think that's always got to be in the background. Of course, there are methods where some can be well validated, and you mentioned RAGs, retrieval augmented, and that's one way of doing it. In imaging specifically, we're probably more interested in VLMs, so that's a sort of hybrid where you use visual and linguistic language text to build models. I think they're more useful. So you can think, for example, of electronic records, doctors' reports alengside an image, and you can train models using both of those. So they're practically more useful and probably a little bit easier to validate. But I'll just add that the computational requirements of large language models are another concern. For that reason, some people have kind of talked about small language models maybe being more deployable maybe, and for some medical applications they might be more appropriate because they can be very tailored to be very domain specific. And then there's a whole sort of cybersecurity and security and data privacy thing that you really, particularly if you're using something like ChatGPT, I don't know how many applications are using, medical applications are using that, but that can throw up a whole range of questions about, you know, well, what was the training data, what's the security of personal patient data being transmitted across web-based clients, that sort of thing. So, so there are quite a few issues there that certainly I'm concerned about as a researcher.
Nikolas, has it changed your world?
So definitely computer vision and specifically segmentation, medical image segmentation. So highlighting, as I was mentioning, like lesions, different types of features in high density 3D volumes, which you would never analyze manually. That's like really made a difference in the space of eye care and ophthalmology, because yeah, that data would just not get analyzed in that way otherwise. Then if you're just going to do like classification, so just take an image and then say, is this disease, or that disease, yeah, I can see that that's a bit of a higher risk kind of problem as well, because especially if you're going to build, based diagnosis on that, and also these classifiers, they're not really interpretable all the time, so that's challenging. But it's definitely changed the world, I think, of ophthalmology when it comes to quantifying features in these images that we were not able to quantify before. It might still make mistakes, but depending on the application, some mistakes, there's some error bars on that, and that's okay. But yeah, I think we need to it's really depending on we have to still be very careful about the applications of this and how it's used, and look at the big picture of the clinical context in which these things are used, and where in the patient pathway they are used as well, and whether there is like some fail-safe or some safeguard expert human that is there to catch these potential mistakes that could go really badly wrong.
Thanks, Nikolas. I realise we've been having such an interesting discussion. We're running a tiny bit late, but as I say, we are going to allow plenty of time for questions. So, first question, please. You two guys were so quick. All right.
Now, one of the things I've always been thinking is that, let's say that we ask some AI robot, well, I couldn't think of a better name for it, but let's think that it's some advanced futuristic robot that, has the tasks outsourced doing by the doctor. Now, this robot is going to try and perform a diagnosis. However, what I suspect is that the doctor himself is going to have the final decision on that. Let's say, so this robot...
Can you turn it into a question?
Yes, I'm going to do it now. Yeah, so this robot does that diagnosis. He presents it to the doctor and then asks the doctor, do you agree that I've came up with this classification? Now, if a doctor had performed this yes or no as to whether the patient has got the disease without the robot, would that doctor's analysis be, well, what's the best way to put this, be influenced by the robot compared to had the robot not been there at all?
Yep, got it. Dean, you look ready to answer this one. No, I think we'll do one person per one question to get through questions quickly.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it opens up lots of other questions as well, some questions, of course. But basically, this goes down to trust, really, of a healthcare professional using a technology. And there's a certain element, as was mentioned earlier, about acceptability of such technologies. So a large part of that is education and actually learning how to use such technologies productively. So that's a big area in itself. I think the way in which a lot of these kind of technologies are working at the moment is they are more on the assistive side than the kind of the dogmatic side. So they are very much maybe sort of screening difficult cases and not really saying anything in terms of a diagnosis, and just saying to radiologists, look at these, I can't work out what's in them. And then there are, at the other end of the scale, there are some where it's pretty much clear cut. I think this is cancer, and then they'd still get an overview from a radiologist, for example, or another clinician. But in that case, the information that's provided is different. So you have sort of different cases, really. So yeah, it certainly is happening at the moment. I think one interesting point about it is how far you go with this. There's a fear that among some parts of the clinical community that they might be replaced, and the wider public as well. They could be replaced by robots or whatever you want to call them. That's not happening really at the moment, but it is.
Okay, so just to summarise that, we're not talking about mass outsourcing of these doctors' decisions to robots just yet.
Not just yet, but I don't think it's far away, but there are issues.
And no big arguments between the robots and doctors.
Well, again, I just said that you assume that the doctor or clinician there is the expert, but that's not always the case. Yeah. I mean, there's a much variability with human-based diagnosis as there is with machine-based diagnosis. So in some cases it can be better with machines. So yeah.
Good question. Okay, we're doing quick fire.
So to mind as well.
Sorry.
Patient practitioners come to mind as
well. This is okay. Carry on.
Hi, my name is Aaron, founder of Cancer Tech Startups. I guess this question comes more from Professor Dean. What's your take on quantum data fidelity, topological data analysis to assist with cancer screening? I had a conversation with someone earlier on this week that mentioned about looking at the genomic profile, but also behavioral data to kind of analyze how it contributes to cancer. So I'm just curious from your expertise, because I only have one question.
It's quite technical. Is anybody an expert in quantum? And you are asking about quantum.
Quantum topological data analysis, TDA for short. So KTDA.
Dean, you look like you really want to answer the question again.
I'm looking that way, but I haven't heard of that technique necessarily, so I'm not completely on top of it. I mean, I think, I'm sure others will comment, but I think quantum is very interesting. How far away that is and how it will be implemented, it's really speculative at the moment. So, it sounds like a technology that probably could have a big impact, like other aspects of quantum computing, but I don't know specifically.
I can only comment very briefly, in general, quantum technologies in terms of simulations and drug discovery. Maybe interesting facts. So I went to a large healthcare and pharma conference in San Francisco earlier this year, which is called JP Morgan. It's one of the huge, largest healthcare conferences globally. And there was a specific global, quantum in pharma event. I went there. It was very sad. There were less than, I think there were 20 people in a similar sized room like this. So I think generally the interest is there and there are progresses, but I think pharma is still pretty also not convinced yet that it will happen in the next 7 years, I would say, realistically. But overall, I think the potential again, it's huge if you can just simulate obviously multiple versions of small molecules and so on, drugs much faster. Again, this comes back here to AI in general. It's just helping us to progress faster in experimentation and in thinking.
And by the way, we did actually run a quantum accelerator just next door here, back in the COVID days, and in those days it definitely was still vaporware. But I did notice the company called D-Wave has just released an actual quantum computer, and their shares are going. This is not share advice, by the way. The question I ask is, by the way, are all very male-oriented. I'd like to be more sort of unbiased on this. Yes.
Hello, I am Shamraki. I am doing Masters in Artificial Intelligence. My thesis is on formal verification of neural network. So I want to know, is formal verification and explainable AI important for healthcare also? And what are the challenges we may face if I want to incorporate them on these sections? Thank you.
Anybody want to have a go? Explainability?
Yeah, I can. So, obviously explainability. No? Yeah. Explainability is obviously, we talked about this, really important. Formal verification, so does that rely on the ground truth being, because that's one of the issues I think maybe in healthcare sometimes we don't really know. The ground truth is just an interpretation of an expert. It might not be right. So I think that's the ground truth is something actually that is something that is not always very objective, unless, so in Eye2Gene, maybe to do a little link to what I do, instead of going to the a diagnosis and a label given by a doctor, we go down to the genetic cause of the disease, and we use that as a label as something that we think is more objective, for example. So I don't know if that helps. I think maybe I'm not. Do you mind explaining formal verification? What you mean by that? Or maybe.
So basically, actually I have a maths background as well. So basically we are using probabilistic model checking and predicate abstraction to ensure that what is the safety level of the deep learning models.
Okay.
Yeah, I think personally I'd say it was very important, extremely important. On the explainability, it's an interesting question actually, just very briefly, because I have been in discussions where clearly there's a need for explainability. People will trust technologies like AI more if they can be explained how they get to the outputs that they get to, particularly if they fail, gives reassurance. But one of the discussions, there was somebody who was involved in drug discovery, and they made the point that actually many commonly used drugs, the mechanisms of actions aren't really very well understood, not known at all in some cases. So then it comes down to, which relates to a formal verification there, is maybe that's a way of helping to ensure that you've got a reliable algorithm, and if particularly you can validate it, and if you imagine that you had a black box and you can show that it's accurate and 100% of the time, then do you really need to know how to explain what happens in that black box? Which I think that's an interesting kind of perspective on the whole kind of explainability debate. But generally speaking, patients particularly and other stakeholders in healthcare like explainability.
I'm going to go to the back 3 lines, just to spread it out a little bit.
Thank you. I would like to ask the panel, do you have any insights of communicating to the regulators about the use of Gen AI in medical devices rather than traditional deep learning technology? Thank you.
I get that. You mentioned FDA earlier.
Yes. You get this one.
So the question was use of Gen AI in medical devices.
Yeah. I think it was, if I heard it correctly, interaction with regulators on the use of Gen AI. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. What question they asked? Yeah.
So use of Gen AI in the devices is obviously increasing, but the compliances and the regulatory, people are not making it easy. I have been looking at many, I'm talking to a lot of companies. We do partner with them for our ecosystem because we do have our app, we have our watch as well, and our tablet for elderly people. And we want to make sure that it's seamless and easy. But it's very difficult to find the devices that comes FDA approved. They are very close to accurate. So one of the companies I was talking to last week was called Intelli Services. They are really cool what they have done, and they have luckily got CE medical approval for just one of the parameters. Then another company I met last year in Germany, Medica, also called, I think, Face Scan. They're also trying to get, but that's just one part, getting, like reading, using a technology called RPPG. I don't know if you've heard about that. So this is a technology where our phone camera is used and it checks the flow of your blood. And checking the flow of blood, it actually gives you an accurate picture of how actually are you doing. So those measurements are also not only for the heart rate, but also blood pressure, heart rate variability, respiratory rate as well. They're actually as accurate as like 96% in certain cases, but still, are they FDA approved? Are they getting regulations? It's still difficult. There are like 1 or 2 cases which I know they have got approvals and we're working with them. But there are a lot of people who are saying that we've applied, we're going to get it for 6 years, they just like applied and it hasn't moved anywhere. So yeah, it is difficult, but it is interesting because now we're not just doing the scanning of the face and in this particular example, but it also is evaluating the mental health of a person based on the parameter. So I think that's a very interesting output that's coming.
Thanks, Dipti. And by the way, guys, I know I've shortchanged you on the questions, but I think we've only got time for one more. So let's see. I'm going to go over there. Sorry to everybody else. We'll cover some other things in the networking.
Thank you. I'm Marie, consultant in AI healthcare, and actually my question will be targeted to Isabel. From an investor perspective, navigating through all these different startup building across healthcare and AI, and based on as well the previous discussion about before lots of investment were done and now there may be more precautious. I'd say, here is my question, how would you decide which startup to invest in, on which specific criteria, and how would you make sure not to be trapped by these trends and investing in startups that are not fit for purpose? And yeah.
Yeah, this goes maybe a little bit back to one of the questions at the beginning, like challenges still in AI and healthcare. I think what we see with a lot of companies at early stage is it's mostly about the technology, about the algorithm. You go to the clinicians or customers being like, our model is 99% or like 100%, accurate. It's better than anything out there. Which is great, but clinicians, they want a product which can be integrated into workflows. So what we usually look at, when we're looking at startups is obviously like, how is this a business or is this a research project? Because you need to understand the customers, the clinicians very, very well. You need to develop with them and not for them. I mean, obviously also for them, but I think there are at early stages a lot of indications already, like if they spend time on regulations, don't push it too far to, they're like, once we have a prototype and then we're going to figure it out, we're going to submit some proposals and so on. You need to, from the start, because it's such a lengthy process and you need the right network and people around you. This is something we look at. And again, you need to build a product. And at the end of the day, you need to generate revenue, unfortunately. We as investors, we need return at the end of the day. There are other investors or grants where it's not the case, but for classic VC, you need to generate revenue, not in 10 or 20 years, but in, let's say, 5 years' time. Yeah.
Just before I thank everybody, just a quick reminder, KXSB.org. You can continue this discussion on there because we've got actually quite a lot of AI and health experience on there. I think all 3 founders have had some involvement in this area. So if you join the Discord channel on there, a typical evening we'll be talking about models and AI and stuff like that, and it's pretty real-time discussion going on there. So anybody who wants to do that, please join kxsb.org. But it just remains for me to thank everybody. We've got some more drinks upstairs. I think we've got some snacks. But I'd particularly like to thank the panel. It's brilliant. I think it was quite a good discussion. And to the audience, come and join us upstairs.